Hello, folks. This is your host, Sharlee Dixon. Before we get started today, we would really like your help. Please rate and review our podcast with 5 stars and make sure to share it with a friend. By spreading the word, you help us grow and reach more people, allowing others to discover the valuable insights shared in each episode. Thank you so much for being an important part of the Behavioral Health Today community.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective. Well, welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I am your host, Peter Fenger, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Sharlee Dixon. Hey, Sharlee.
Hey, Peter. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Well, today you're listening to our BHT Bytes, our shorter, focused series where we unpack trending topics shaping behavioral health landscape. One of the things listeners might not know about is oftentimes behind the scenes, Sharlee and I are talking about the intersections of our work and TV and movies that we watch, especially about how mental health is portrayed in film and TV and music. I think as we sort of talk about this stuff, you and I have sort of seen a rise in popularity in mental health, or maybe portrayal of mental health in more of like an empathetic or a human way of storytelling. You know, I sort of think about depictions of madness of the 70s and 80s and more nuanced portrayals in recent years like Silver Linings Playbook, 13 Reasons Why, or even the most recent Thunderbolts movie out of Disney and Marvel. We see that media is sort of evolving, and it's going fast as well. While the increased visibility has been largely positive, I want to talk about maybe the unintended side effects. I'm talking about over-pathologizing everyday emotions, or turning diagnoses into identities, and even how awareness doesn't always equal accuracy. So I guess my question today, and my sort of setting it up, is I'd like to ask what happens when mental wellness becomes mainstream? I know that awareness of mental health and general wellness has been growing, and I know that COVID did even more and further pushed some of the immense wave of mental health that we've seen in advocacy. As a whole, our cultural awareness of mental health has grown, and it only makes sense that the conversation has bled into the media that we've ingested. To sort of set up how we see this change in media is that when there's enough audience interest where producers will put money behind these type of stories, we see social topics. I think of maybe queer films of the 80s and 90s to what we have today of dramas and comedies around the gay experience are mainstream. So really reflecting on depictions of mental health from media from my childhood, where therapy or mental illness was met with a lot of stigma. I'm talking about maybe decade-defining novels like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, same parodied in cartoons in the 90s. These stories kept on repeating the same thing, that therapy and therapists were the villains. I think it took maybe an adult, I'm putting this in quotes, an adult character like Fraser Crane to color in maybe a greater spectrum of the therapist character and deeper stories around mental wellness. I know that the show had plenty of jabs at the character, but it also presented the therapist as a hero, and they took the goal of mental wellness seriously. I know that there are other films that I can list off, but I'm curious to you, Sharlee, what do you think sort of sparked this shift of maybe like horror tropes and villainized to more of a humanized, heroic portrayals of mental health in media?
Honestly, Peter, I think it just seeing it more often. And you mentioned earlier, like with COVID, we were all just kind of sitting at home, spending more and more time thinking about things and spending more times on social media like TikTok or Instagram, creating these videos, really talking to ourselves, but talking to each other about the things that we were experiencing and really recognizing how we actually felt about things and starting to really address those mental health concerns. So I think it took it a step further from just these types of negative things that we see in, TV shows and things that were meant to maybe be funny or were the extreme of certain mental health illnesses to more of an everyday, like, wait a minute, I
Yes.
feel those things too. Like it took
Yes.
away a lot of the stigma and a lot of the being alone with it. Everybody starts to
Hmm.
feel these sorts of things and really be open about how they feel and what
Yeah.
they're seeing.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And, I often kind of think that still today in our society, that movies and film is sort of like the pinnacle of media.
Hmm.
I sort of think of like stories and how we tell. Movies are the pinnacle of adaptions, right? We see books written and then we see it coming to a movie, and then that's the real prestige part. Now, that's
Right.
not always the case, but I think, we've seen a lot of really good stories, and stories have been telling these journeys of mental wellness for a long time.
Hmm.
And I think the conversations happening in film, I see it change kind of in the 2010s.
Yeah.
I think of a movie like Silver Linings Playbook, and
Hmm.
that was a very good adaptation of a character dealing with a real mental illness, but making him the hero. I also think of The Virgin Suicides, also a book, and that was a conversation of depression and suicide. Even
Hmm.
the TV show, 13 Reasons Why. All those books were certain written at a time, but it also sort of reflected some of the conversations that they were having in society as well.
Right, right. And again, it kind of brought us out of that isolation of
Yes.
I'm the only one that is dealing with this,
Yes.
and just being more honest with ourselves. And so I think this, honestly, going back in time, we weren't honest with
Mhm.
these are the things that I am experiencing. This is what I am feeling. And thinking back, back towards movies. I don't know if you saw What's Eating Gilbert Grape, but it
Yes.
was one of the movies from my childhood, and watching it as an adult, I'm like, oh, she just had immense grief. Like that
Yeah.
is why she just ate. She fed her emotions. And her son had these mental and developmental challenges. And that is difficult to understand and to grasp. And so back then it was like, I cannot believe that this happened. It was again the stigma around all of it. But
Yes.
as more of us are open and honest about what life really is like for us, I think that that bridges that gap and again brings it towards the media to show this is really what we are all experiencing.
Yeah. 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 It's kind of interesting, when we talk about some of these stories,
Mhm.
they help us grow our emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
And one of the more interesting stories that I've seen kind of come up is just the storyline of the enemy isn't any of the characters. It's
Mm.
sort of the mental health around it.
Yeah.
Again, I'll park on the Thunderbolts. I thought that was a really great movie. And again, apologies, spoilers for those that haven't seen it. But these superheroes are going up against something that isn't really like an entity. It's
Right.
more of just one person's mood at that
Mhm.
time. And
Yeah.
that the villain isn't exactly like villainized. It was brought together with care and empathy and love.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
honestly, I don't when you told me I should watch it, I was like, "I don't know about this, Peter." But when I went to go see the movie, I'm like, and now I see exactly what he's saying because the villain it wasn't a person trying to harm everyone. He was really dealing with some things internally, and I don't know one person who isn't dealing with things internally. I don't.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting about sort of these conversations is I feel like the visibility
Mm.
of these mental health topics has also led to unintended consequences. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is like self-diagnosis or
Mhm.
maybe over-identifying with a diagnosis. Have you seen
Yeah.
that as well?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. As I was kind of preparing for this discussion today, that's one of the things that, again, the TikToks, the reels on IG, it really brought about these. While the focus is great on mental health and mental well being, it really started to bring certain buzzwords like
Mhm.
narcissism or
Yes.
gaslighting or trauma or even people self-diagnosing with mental health concerns and haven't necessarily gone and done the work with an actual behavioral health professional. And so while I do appreciate that the things are more mainstream and we're again being able to be honest about how we feel, it did kind of sensationalize it a little bit.
Yes.
And now, for a while it was, oh, he's narcissistic and this is how you deal with a narcissistic person. And so you're really over labeling certain things that may not necessarily be real.
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of makes me think of this other discussion that we've seen in some guests of destigmatizing
Mm.
the diagnosis. The interesting part is that we will probably see this shift in media as well, and I'm sure that there's plenty other examples that I can't think of at the moment, but bringing it all back to it being a human experience,
Yeah.
right? That it's
Yeah.
not something that we need to identify and we need to treat.
Right.
It's that we need to kind of go through it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I completely agree with you. It's kind of funny. While I was in getting my master's in social work, and I think most people who have done some form of behavioral health education can identify with this, but I know I diagnosed myself with so much stuff because you're reading through all these, the DSM-4 or 5, whatever we're at now, thinking about, oh man, I do that. Like, oh no, I do that too. Like,
Yeah.
so you are really just diagnosing yourself when really it is an expression of just what humans can deal with. And
Yes.
while a mental health diagnosis is absolutely serious, and those who are really struggling do need to, look forward to focusing on improvement and, therapy or whatever you need to do to better yourself. At the same time, some of that is an expression of just what life is like as a human, especially in today's world where we have access to so much information, good or bad. We hear about everything in the moment, like it's all there for us, blasting us at all times. So a lot of what we see and feel may not necessarily be a mental health diagnosis, but just an expression of how we are experiencing the world today. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Most of us spend more time at work than anywhere else doing anything else. So why not spend that time in a job you love? Introducing Triad's Jobs Marketplace, the only job site dedicated specifically to behavioral and mental health professionals. Featuring more than 1,000 open jobs from dozens of behavioral and mental health employers, and searchable by location, professional field, employment type, specialization, and more. Jobs Marketplace helps you find your next career opportunity. Full-time, part-time, or gig time, make the most of your time. To access Jobs Marketplace, register for your free professional account at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT, and then click to Jobs Marketplace. If you're already a member of the Triad community, visit app.hellotriad.com/jobs. That's app.hellotriad.com/jobs. Visit us today and take your next career step tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's maybe some of the limitations to this kind of storytelling, right? When we think of the hero's arc, they have to be kind of specific and almost extreme in certain ways in order to sort of communicate those emotions. And I think that there is a responsibility from the creators of how the stories are told. I think that there has to be a degree of authenticity. We often find it in sort of the characters that show up with a certain gender type or a certain sexuality. Like, I think it makes more sense for them to be played by actors with lived experience, right? And I think it should be looked at. But I also see some ethics around this. I kind of see it in some of the context that we present old or older media. It'll be some sort of context at the beginning of the film that says, hey, this was made at a different time where we didn't necessarily have the knowledge, but understand that these are just older tropes and you're going to be seeing it in this media. I think that that's responsible of how we sort of portray those things. What are your thoughts on creators and their responsibility, in telling these stories?
I do think that there is a certain level of responsibility that creators and writers have to this, not just to give it some level of authenticity, because again, this is the human experience, but then even within that human experience, sometimes it can be overstated to give the right idea that fits that for the movie.
Mhm.
And so I do think that I don't know if it needs to be some type of trigger warning, in quotations, or in addition to the parental advisories in the beginning, just and where it usually says mild violence, maybe it can say mental health concerns addressed, or that type of thing, so that it is something that you are aware of going into it. Because again, I knew about Thunderbolts because you told me, but I would not have known otherwise. I feel like I needed to be prepared for that going into it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that there'll be creative ways for folks to maybe present, I don't know if warning is the right way, but context around that. I also think like history is reflected well on those that do the work. I think of how old media is being, I don't know, archived and podcasts and stuff like that. And people that will do deeper dives on, TV shows, they're like, oh, they're actually speaking, Japanese in this cartoon. And they took the time to find legitimate actors. And that was a different time. Like, I think those efforts are reflected well as we go through history. And it's sort of like the building blocks that we have today that show really strong ways of showing cultural authenticity when those things are handled.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask you, from a point of view as a social worker, is there a type of character that you wish that you had seen in media when it comes to mental health, maybe that you don't quite see yet, but you feel like could resonate?
That's an interesting question, because there are bits and pieces of lots of movies that show almost every, I'd say, mental health concern or issue. But these days, now that I am working more with older folks and I am seeing people in advanced age, who are experiencing more issues with dementia. And so while that's not necessarily a specific mental health diagnosis alone, there are lots of other health things that come with it. I was not, and am still not really, prepared to handle all of the emotional things that come along with dementia, Alzheimer's, and not just the person experiencing it, but their caregivers or their family members or their child. I just had a situation today where a daughter, her mom lives in a assisted living facility, has advanced dementia. She's on dialysis, but she found out that she has these other health concerns. Mom doesn't really understand what's happening to her, and daughter is trying to figure out what she does now. And so it would be nice to kind of see what that looks like portrayed in film and TV shows, to really see, how do people make those types of choices? What types of questions do you ask yourself? And even though that person, is experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's disorder, how do we work with them through that? They have moments of clarity and moments of, extreme confusion. What does that look like in between? How do we navigate those things? So it would be nice to see that portrayed, in the media, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent example. I mean, I didn't have one in mind, but I was just curious on your own opinion. That is an excellent example. I do think maybe even leaning more into just that age group. Like, I think of a movie like, I don't know if you've seen this one, Velma. It's essentially like a heist movie, but for people that are in their 80s. And I just thought it was so unique. Not only is the actress and the actors in that movie incredibly talented, even at their age at 80, but it just presents a different perspective of life, of people that are, living within a care facility and still trying to maintain their independence. I just thought it's not really a story that I see. And, you're highlighting a really good one about, people living with dementia and the family dynamic that sort of goes into it. So I think you've hit on a very good age group. I mean, and, you kind of think of, how people work when you get that age, you should be, retiring, and maybe that still exists within film, right? When you hit a certain age, you're supposed to step out of the limelight.
And maybe that's the issue. There aren't enough actors,
older people writing those scripts, or
Yeah.
older actors stepping into those roles.
Absolutely.
But I do want to ask you, sort of as a social worker, can you think of a TV show or a movie where they portrayed that role really well? Because I did my own research, and the internet didn't spit out a very strong list of social workers in film, but I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you if there was maybe a particular character that resonated with you.
As a social worker, I've actually seen a couple. One of them was the TV series you told me about, The Pit. I think that social worker, or just how the entire emergency department treated mental health, period, or treated the social worker's importance on the team. I see it now in a health setting, but I can be honest, and not in all settings that I've ever worked in was my opinion as a social worker very important. And so to see it portrayed on this TV show, and for her, or for just that social worker role to be of such importance, and see the value that she brought to not just the patients' lives, but to the staff's lives, because she was also talking with them about how things were going with them. Like, she remembered negative things that had happened to characters. Like, is there something I can do for you? And that is really what, in my experiences and in what I try to be as a social worker, like, we really just try to help people throughout their lives and just try to help them make it. So I'd say The Pit is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. I know when I had seen that and we first talked about it, I thought it was a great addition to sort of that dynamic in the cast. But I also understand, and I think it kind of rings true, but the social worker role was anytime that they had somebody that was falling through the gaps, they were the solution. They're like, I have plenty of other patients to deal with. Take this person who is in need of psychiatric medicine, and you take care of it. And then there was like no follow-up. They didn't get any sort of arc. They were just a character to solve the problem. And anytime that they needed to pawn somebody off, where it was like, we need to contact Child Protective Services, or we need to figure out somebody's insurance, they were the problem solver.
And honestly, that is really, like, in all of the areas that I've worked in, from being Child Protective Services worker to working in public school system in multiple different states, to right now working in the medical field, that is really what it's like. If something goes wrong, can you get Dixon? Something is happening. Go get Sharlee, because I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. One of my coworkers actually calls me Olivia from SVU, Law and Order, because she feels like I do all the investigating and then I figure it out and I fix it and then it's over. So in her mind, I am Olivia.
I like it. It's a nice nickname and well earned.
Yes, thank you.
Well, we've seen mental health has found a louder and more visible place in cultural stories, and that's worth celebrating. But any narrative shift, it comes with growing pains. We talk about misrepresentation, over-identification. The line between awareness and accuracy can get sort of blurry. But my hope is that pop culture will continue to move deeper, more honest portrayals, ones that reflect both the challenges and the resilience of those living with mental health conditions. Because in the end, recovery, support, and identity are all more complex than any single episode or movie can capture. So thank you very much for joining us on today's episode of BHT Bytes, and we hope to see you next time on Behavioral Health Today. We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Tried Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.